Good day, fellow champions of inclusion. I'm A. Ron, and this is the Inclusive Dad Podcast, where we explore inclusion and make it practical. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me in exploring ways we can create a more inclusive world together. You are important, you matter, and you can make a difference. Today, my guest is Jason Tuttle. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Why don't you just start us off by just telling me a little bit about who you are?
Okay, I'm a married father, 21 years at this point, of two kids with a whole host of medical disabilities, both cognitive and physical disabilities. The easiest way to explain it is we had a boy and a girl almost 2 years apart to the day. My son was born first, my daughter born second. Their issues are identical except for my son's rare condition. So within the first 5 years of my wife being married, both of our kids had severe developmental delays, epilepsy. In fact, of the 6 different kinds of seizures, we've seen 4 of them in my house. They're both nonverbal. They're both wheelchair bound in the sense of I can hold behind them and they can walk with me, but they can't walk on their own.
Yep.
They can like army crawl like nobody's business, but to walk on their own, no. The rare condition my son has, which my daughter did not have, is a condition called Eagle-Barrett syndrome. It's 1 in 40,000 births at the time of my son's birth. I think it's still about the same. Doctors don't officially know what the initial cause of it is. They know it's related to something with the kidneys, possibly the GI tract, somewhere in there, because like my son had a urologist all of his life. But the easiest way to explain prune belly without getting long-winded is he was born without any core abdominal muscle. Like what people go to the gym to work out, he had none of. Like I could lay him on the floor and from the outside touching his skin, I could point at his large intestine, his small intestine, his stomach, his bladder. I mean, I could point all of it out like one of those biology lab dummies we grew up with in high school. Yeah. So he had no core abdominal muscle. He had an abnormally large bladder that I had to give him a catheter for every 4 hours, at least for the first 5 years of his life. And he had a normal lung capacity and like normal lungs, but because he didn't have the abdominal muscles when like cold and flu season would come around, whereas you and I can kind of build that pressure up to like cough the crud out, because he didn't have that base there, he had a hard time coughing stuff out. So if I didn't catch it early enough, he would ultimately end up in the hospital. And probably the first 6 years of his life, he was in and out of the hospital every 6 months.
Wow, that's a lot. So yeah, I have 2 kids. They're 15 months apart. My son was born first, and my daughter found out at 3 months old she was having seizures. I don't know if I've counted many types, the different types she's had, but for sure, like focal seizures, grand mal seizures, for those 2 for sure. So she's had 90-minute grand mals airlifted multiple times. So
oh wow,
I've had been around too many seizures. I need to find wood. More recently, as she's gotten older, that's the medication has been staying on top of it, thankfully. But every once in a while now, I see a memory on Facebook, like where it's like a week or 2 stretch where there's just a lot of them. So it was yeah, it was a lot. So, and she's also, I call her kind of somewhat nonverbal. I mean, I can understand her since I know I've been around her a long time, obviously. But like if you met her, you might have trouble understanding her. Similar, like she uses a wheelchair. She can, like you're saying, if I'm behind her, I can support her enough for her to be able to walk short distances. But yeah, so a few similarities.
Sure.
Yeah. So did you have any experience with like any like special health needs or disability prior to your children being born?
No, I had none. In fact, up until the week 20 appointment, which for any woman knows that's where you find out the sex of the child, we had no reason to believe there were going to be any issues. In fact, the irony is during that time, my father got really big into like ancestry.com, and like he went back like 10 generations. Like he really got into it, and there were no health issues that were, at least to a certain point, there were no health issues that were recorded, because we all know probably prior to the 50s, maybe it was kind of taboo to say I had a child with X, Y, and Z. But I mean, outside of like family members that like had self-induced issues, like maybe an alcoholism, that kind of thing, either side, we had no issues. And, when we found out my wife got pregnant, she came home and we talked about it, and we were excited with at the time it was my son. And I'll never forget it. She goes, "What if we have a child with medical needs?" And my exact response was, "Well, if we have one, we'll just deal with it as it comes." I don't believe in alternative methods that others do. And I just said, we'll deal with it as it comes. And, the running joke in our house is, God heard me and he obliged because I had two.
Right. So did you know before either child was born that they were going to have the extra needs and stuff?
No. And honestly, it was the week 20 appointment. We went in there. My wife didn't want to know the sex of the child. I did, just because I was a planner and I was the one that did the nursery. And, it basically came down to, I didn't want to paint in neutral colors is what it came down to. And we went back and forth playfully, and the ultrasound tech goes, "I'm at that point. Would you like to know?" And we kind of went back and forth, and we didn't make an answer fast enough. And she goes, "Well, I found an issue. I need to know." And we immediately said, "Yes, we want to know. You're having a boy. Great." I said, "What's the issue?" And she goes, "Well, that's kind of a doctor relayed message." And I said, "I understand," because, she was the tech. And I said, "But if you can't tell me that, why did you need to know if it was a boy or a girl?" And she goes, "Well, if it's a boy, if it's what I think it is, it's rare in boys, but it's even rarer in girls." Which that's what his Eagle-Barrett syndrome. Eagle-Barrett syndrome is typically 97% male. So if you do have a girl with it, it's ridiculously more rare on that end of it. So it was that week 20 appointment that we found out with him. And from that point, we started seeing a perinatologist, which is a high risk OBGYN, up until week 38, where my wife gave birth.
Okay. Wow. So it was that it's pretty rare, but it was just the tech was able to recognize it.
Well, I mean, she didn't imply that she knew it was the Eagle-Barrett syndrome. I guess something that she saw implied there was an issue there.
I got you.
And like, even though we knew that there were some issues that were going on, I did not actually find out about the Eagle-Barrett syndrome until the day he was born.
Okay.
And it was, my wife gave birth. She had a C-section. They immediately whisked him off to the NICU where we were at. And it was the doctor that came in and said, "Well, your son was born with this condition." I went, "Excuse me, what?" And it was the next day that the local children's hospital came down and got him and transported him up to the children's hospital. And he was there probably 12 days at that point.
Yeah. So for us, we didn't know anything until, like I said, 3 months old. Some aunts who are nurses noticed she was staring off to the side, so we got her checked out. So her birth, she was a repeat C-section, so nothing, never, pregnancy was, everything was normal. So we didn't know anything, never found out. We were just told there was a stroke at some point. They couldn't pinpoint when it was because everything was normal. So yeah,
sure,
it's interesting. So as a dad, when you find out your child has like the extra needs, like how did you process that, or want to talk a little bit about like what you were thinking?
I went through kind of a lot of emotion. I didn't realize it at the time. I do now. There was a grieving process there from the life I thought we might have versus the life we actually got.
Right.
And so it was that, but it was in the moment, it was more, we're just married, like second year.
Right.
We're having a child that's got all these medical needs. how are we going to deal with this? What is his quality of life going to be? As a man, how am I going to pay for this? What are all these millions of factors that we've got to now factor in of how is life going to change? And so it was more the confusion. I didn't really know what was going on, although I'm a researcher. So the moment I found out the name of his condition, I started researching everywhere I could, at least to get an idea of what maybe the future held.
Okay.
And so, like I say, it was a little bit of like internal anger, if you will, but not directed at anybody. It was more confusion of where do I go from here?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. For me, it was, I wish I would have wrote down stuff from back then. For me, it was more just like, it's my daughter. We just need to do what it takes. I don't remember a lot of worrying about the future piece of it. I guess I'm not, maybe I did. I just have kind of forgotten about it, but it's interesting. Yeah. How we kind of react to things. Were you able to find any other kind of dads to talk with about it, or what? For me, I haven't been able to find a lot of other dads where I can share my story and, talk to them. Have you been able to find dads on your journey?
Not honestly, at least on the special needs journey, I'm now at year, I think it's 19 or 18. It's been a while that I've been doing it. I've definitely found a lot of women because women tend to be on social media and in groups and that kind of stuff. Honestly, not a ton. My kids, when they were young, started at a private special needs school. So I got to know some of them a little bit, but to say like we were close, not really. I'm going to date myself in the sense of the moment I found out that my son had Eagle-Barrett syndrome, I got on MySpace of all things. And I actually found a woman that had a child with Eagle-Barrett syndrome and cystic fibrosis out in Seattle.
Okay.
She was the first person I ever connected with that actually had a child with my son's condition.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, for me, it's same with me. I haven't connected with a lot of dads, and I go to a lot of meetings and stuff for school things when my daughter's in school, and it's all females. It's interesting how there's way less males in this world, it seems like.
Well, and I was a stay-at-home parent for 12 years, so I got to deal with, I ran across a lot of the female teachers didn't know how to react to me.
Yeah.
Maybe my personality, maybe my demeanor. I'm 6'2", 235, so I'm not a tiny guy.
Okay. Yeah.
And I've always been pleasant. I've never been like mean or rude to anybody, but I ran across that a lot. They just didn't know how to handle it, and I'm just like, if something happens, don't call my wife. I'm the one that does all the IEPs, all the medical stays, all the doctors. I'm the one that talk to me. I have the knowledge.
Yeah, and I was more so on the IEP stuff where, I was kind of the one that researched into it, checked out what the laws were, and I was way more up on that stuff. So it is interesting. Because, it's all, if I go to any special education meetings, it's mostly females, unless there's some male teachers there. Otherwise, it's mostly always females.
Exactly.
That's interesting. So I ask all my guests, what is your definition of inclusion?
Well, I've in the beginning, if you would have asked me that, I'd have probably had some long drawn out answer. But I have learned over the years that sometimes the best answer is the simplest answer. And, I tell people just simply acceptance. I get that people tend to shy away from that in which they don't understand. And that's fine. There are a lot of things that even in my journey, there are a lot of doctors that didn't know what Eagle-Barrett syndrome, and I had to educate them on it. Yeah. And that's fine. So, I just tell people, there's the old saying that, variety is the spice of life, and people come in all forms, shapes, sizes, you name it. And, even though that child that may have a condition, that there's a physical issue that you notice, what I've learned in the special needs community, some of those people that you're afraid of are probably the nicest people you'll ever come across.
Right.
So I just tell people, just you don't have to go up to them. You don't have to, just accept. I mean, there are a lot of differences in this world.
Right. That's great. What has there been any lessons that you've learned from your kids on the journey? Have they taught you anything about life?
My son lived 15 years of his of life before he passed away, and he was the most laid back. Nothing ever bothered him. He was the most laid back, happy child, and for all purposes, if you will, he lived a medically, hard life. We were constantly in and out of the hospital. I was constantly doing physical procedures on him. He got to the point when I would cath him every 4 hours that he would literally lay on the floor, put his hands behind his head, and just look at me and go, "All right, old man, let's get this show on the road." And I mean, nothing bothered it. And all the times we were ever in the hospital, I think he cried twice.
Right.
And that was only because he was in a lot of pain.
Right.
So, he taught me just to kind of go with the flow and just simply just living life as it comes, versus kind of the way my personality is outside of him, where I'm like a lot of men tend to stress and all the other wonderful things that come along with life.
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah. My daughter too, like you talk about doctors. I mean, she goes to doctor visits. She's laughing, having a good time. And I'm like this, most people I don't think act that way, but like her, it's funny. She thinks it's great. I avoid the doctor if I half can at any chance. She's just laughing, goes to the dentist. She laughs. It's just like, okay, cool.
Yep.
I wish I could do the same thing.
I used to never think, in my younger days, I used to think I wasn't a type A personality, but in my older years, I've become a type A personality.
Yeah. And for me, I guess another kind of a lesson I learned after my daughter was born is just, as a guy, I felt like I need to work a lot, need to go out there, work. And then after, her stuff starts happening, she starts having seizures. Like, okay, that's not what life's about. Like, I need to spend more time at home, enjoy those moments. Don't feed into the having to work all the time, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, that was one lesson I definitely learned. I mean, after she was born and going through some of that stuff, got to figure out what's the important stuff in life.
Sure.
Yeah. So do you want to talk a little bit more about your son passing away? And
sure. So the first probably 5 or 6 years of his life, he, as I stated earlier, we were in and out of the hospital, mainly a lot of respiratory related issues. And about 2014, he had a major midsection reconstructive surgery called an abdominoplasty. And basically what that means is they kind of cut him open from his navel almost to the bottom of his sternum. From what the urologist described it as, they kind of insert this kind of medical mesh in there to kind of give structure and stability. They kind of sew it into him and they sew him back up, and that helps to give the kind of form that he needed, that he would have had if he'd had abdominal muscles, but he's now getting. Okay. So after that surgery, we were rarely in the hospital. Now, granted, at that point in time, I was more proactive with a lot of his care, so that was part of it. So about 2014 until almost, there's 8 years that I mean, we had a few 24-hour viruses in there, but at the end of January of 2022, my son came home that evening, as well as his sister. We did our normal routine. I got him in, I got him changed, I got him, I fed him, I put my daughter to bed. at that point in time, I kept my son up about an hour later just to give him some one-on-one time with his mother and I. And we went to go brush his teeth because he liked an electric toothbrush because of his sensory issues. And my wife went to like brush his teeth. And I don't know if she went down a little too far, but like he threw up a little bit, didn't think much about it. And I just looked at my wife. I said, well, maybe he still had something in his system. You hit his gag reflex and it just came up. Cleaned him up, got him in bed. And normally he was a great sleeper. Well, that night he was up and down all night long, which is very unusual for him. And I'm a stay-at-home parent at this point. I look at my wife and I say, I'm going to keep him home because he's in a self-contained classroom. I don't know if it's contagious. I don't want to spread it to the other kids in the room, so I'll keep him home. Mm-hmm. Well, that next day, he refuses to take a nap. He looks like he's uncomfortable. Nothing really strikes me as like off other than I think he may have a 24-hour virus. He's just got to kind of get through it. So we get through that day. He doesn't really drink and eat a whole lot that day, which at that point I'm like, it's only a day. If he starts doing this tomorrow, then it's going to catch my attention because something's not right. So we put him down the same time as his sister, and he immediately gets quiet. And I just look at my wife and I go, well, he's been up essentially for like 38 hours at this point. I'm sure he's just exhausted. We figured he went to sleep. I kept him home. The first night, that was Wednesday night. I kept him home Thursday. It was Friday morning. I texted his teacher, said, I'm going to keep him home one more day. I said to give him a couple of days. He's got the weekend. He'll come back on Monday. Great, wonderful. Send my daughter off to school. And then we give him to what we would normally give on the weekend to get him up. I walk into his room, and typically he would he'd bounce and get excited when I walked his room, like because he knew I was going to get him up and we were going to start the day. Well, I walk in there and he's just kind of looking at me. He doesn't really bounce or anything. It doesn't strike me, but in my mind, I'm going, well, he's not really bouncing a whole lot. I wonder what's going on. So I walk around to his right side and I notice a dark green streak of fluid coming out of his mouth. And I look at my wife and I go, I don't know a ton about this area, but I know bile is dark green, and why is it coming out of his mouth? Right. So I get him out of bed and he's floppy, like he can't hold himself up. And even with that, I've had that before. And I was just like, well, this doesn't really strike me, but let's get him out in the living room. I'll go through kind of my medical protocol and we'll see where we are at that point. Well, I do all that. And the only thing that really stands out to me is with his Eagle-Barrett syndrome, his midsection was really pliable, like it was squishy still. Well, I went to go feel his midsection at this point, and it's like cinder block brick wall hard. Mm-hmm. And this catches my attention. And I look at my wife and I go, this is not right. Something is not right. And so he's still just kind of laying there. I mean, he's conscious and all. And it was just a gut feeling. I looked at my wife. I said, I'm getting him dressed. I'm taking him to the children's hospital. I said, something is not right. I don't know what it is, but I've got to get him to the hospital. So I get him in our van. I'm doing 90 miles an hour up to the hospital. I get into the parking deck and I go to get him out of his car seat to put him in his wheelchair. And he's really floppy. Like it catches my attention. And at this point, I'm just like, something is definitely wrong. Right. So I get up and get into the ER and like I skip the line because I need to get their attention fast. And, like the security guard gets over to me as if to say, get back in line. And before he can say a word, I literally look at him and go, I don't think he's breathing. I need help immediately. And so he snaps his fingers. The nurse looks at me and she says, follow me. Now, this children's hospital I'd been in 100 times before. Mm-hmm. This is the first time from like the front door of the ER. We literally go in a full run all the way back into the ER into a trauma room. So we get into one of those rooms and I instinctually get him out of his wheelchair. I put him on the table that's there and I back away because he's nonverbal and I'm hoping that they're going to let me stay in there because he can't tell them what's going on. Mm-hmm. And so luckily they do. I back off into a trauma room that's like butted up to it. And they come out of nowhere and like they immediately cut his clothes off. And like a podcast a while ago I was talking to, there was a nurse on there, and I said the one thing that they did that kind of threw me off was he was on the table and they immediately drilled something into his knee, and she said, yeah, that's a port to put in to like get antibiotics into his system. I said, well, they gave him no pain meds and they drilled it into his knee, and I said he never flinched. And I said a normal person would have come off that table because it would have been excruciatingly painful. I said he never moved. Yeah. So I'm in the trauma room next to it. The head ER doc comes over to me and goes, down to the minute, how long has he been this way? And I tell her, she goes off, barks orders, and then she comes back to me and she goes, explain to me the scenario as to why you brought him here. And so I tell her, and then she goes back and barks orders at them, and they kind of do their thing. Well, in that meantime, they intubate him, which is put the tube down into his lungs so they can get air into him. They start chest compressions, and they're doing like 5 or 6 different things. Well, they start CPR, and they're doing it for about 10 minutes, and then all of a sudden I see him get the paddles out, and they put him on him, and like a medical drama, they yell clear, and he literally launches off this table. And because I had looked at the like monitors with like breathing rate and heart rate and pulse on it for years, I immediately turned there, and literally his heart rate goes boop and goes right back to what it's doing. And at that point, even though it doesn't hit me in my brain, I go, he's not coming back. And just the severity and just the realness of everything hasn't hit me because I've compartmentalized everything. And I'm like, I've got to get through this moment to see what happens on the other end. So whatever I'm going to do next, so I'm coherent to do whatever I'm going to do next. Well, they shock him once. They ultimately shock him probably 5 more times, and it's all the same result. And the head ER doc comes over to me and goes, well, I could do it one more time, but she said, unfortunately, I think the result's going to be the same. And I said, do what you think is medically necessary in your professional opinion. And so they do it one more time, and they pronounce him. As you can imagine, I kind of turn into the other room and have a moment for just a minute. And I turn back around, and like the head of the care team, I called his mother because she was working at home. As far as she knew, I was bringing him up there. He was going to be admitted. We were going to stay our 7 to 10 days. And I was going to tell her I'm going to be in a room. Yeah. Well, I had to tell her that her son that she just saw 45 minutes earlier was dead on a table. And I'll never forget the sound she made. I'll never forget her reaction. I then had to call my mother and tell her. Now, later, my mother came back and said, when you called me that day, how soon had Zachary passed away? I said, probably 10 minutes. And she goes, you were eerily calm, like nothing had happened. And I said, well, I had to compartmentalize. I said, because I had to call my wife, I had to call you, and then the care team came in, and I said, there was like 20 questions I needed to know answers to. And I said, I needed to know all this as my peace of mind. And like when the care team came in, the head lady comes in, I literally look at her and I point at my son who's passed away on the table. And I go, I will deal with him in a minute. I need to know some answers. And I said, I don't mean that to sound cold and callous. I said, but information is going to help me right now. And so she goes, okay, what's your question? And I rapid fire off like 20 questions back to back to back to her. And like, she literally takes a step back and, she finally gets all that information in, and, you know, I'm sitting there with my son waiting for his mother to come up and family to come up, that kind of thing. And, you know, it kind of went from there. I tell people all the time, the 2 things I'll never forget from that day outside from passing is how quickly he got cold. It's a weird thing to remember, but it's just something that stuck with me. And then when we finally left, I had to take all of his cut off clothes, put it into his empty wheelchair, and roll it through the hospital to get to our van. And to this day, that was the hardest thing I ever had to do.
Wow. Yeah, that's wow. Thank you for sharing that. I have not.
Well, thank you.
I have not had that exact experience, but I mean, my daughter had enough seizures where I mean, I would, if she was already there, they would like point me to the room that she was in, and I was like,
Yep.
that's many times, but that ability to like you're in that moment and like crazy stuff's happening around you and you can still like focus and get the job done. I mean, I've been in similar spots where it's just like that moment it doesn't hit you, and then later it's like, well, that was crazy. I was not like they're doing crazy stuff in 90-minute grand mal seizure. Like she's had something similar where they put something into her leg and it's crazy.
Yeah. And now I tell people all the time now, when I finally got, like, I'm in his room now, and you can't see it, but when his wheelchair is in the same spot I left it in 3 years ago. And when I walked in here that afternoon and saw it was empty, when that morning he had just woken up, it was at that point it hit me like a Mack truck. And we still had to go over to my parents with all my family was there. And I had to muscle through trying to tell them everything that had happened. And so it took me the longest time because, you know, I would tell them a few words and I'd get that trembly feeling in my throat. And I mean, it just, that was difficult to get through as well.
How about telling your daughter? Did she understand it?
Well, my daughter has developmental delays like her brother did. And so it was hard in the sense of I had to put it in as easy layman's terms as I could possibly get it because she wouldn't understand the concept of death and, you know, what happens after or just in the belief system, that kind of thing. So she always knew that when I took her brother to the hospital, I left, I took him, I stayed the whole time, and I came home with him. So when we came home that initial first time, she was still in school. She had no idea any of this was going on. And when she got home, she had this puzzled look of, she called her brother Bubba because that's the word that came out. And so she just looked at me like, well, where's Bubba? And I just looked at her with just, you know, with the kind of sadness that was in my face and said, girl, I said, Bubba's not here with us anymore. I said, he's in heaven. I said, if Daddy could have saved him, Daddy would have. Because she knew I always did all the physical medical stuff. And I said, Daddy did everything he could. I said, doctors did everything they could. I said, like 30 people did everything they could. And I said, we couldn't do anything. I said, Zachary was just way too sick for us to do anything. And at that point, I think she kind of got it. But for the longest time, I think she was angry with me because I didn't bring him home. And, you know, and when I tell people that, I don't fault her at all. That was her normal reaction to, you didn't bring Bubba home. And that's how she's expressing it. And so probably the first 6 months, I would say she was probably, I could tell she was upset with me.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I know it's very personal for you. And I don't remember how long ago it was, but I listened to you tell that similar version of that story on that when you spoke at that event. So,
yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the book that you created?
Sure.
In his honor and how it came about and the stories in it and stuff.
So when my son passed, I've always been a proponent of counseling therapy. I believe that we all go through seasons where we need it, whether we want to admit it or not. And so for a year afterwards, I was doing weekly sessions. And it was in one of those sessions that my counselor said, have you ever thought about journaling? And the irony of her saying that was, and I'll never forget it. I go, you know, I don't know if I'm that great at journaling. I don't know. I don't know if that's my thing. And I say that's ironic now based on the community I've built and the following I have. People look at me and go, you don't think you can write? And I went, well, in the beginning, I didn't think I could resonate with people, but apparently I've been proven wrong. So not to get in a long-winded version of it, basically what happened is I started sharing journal entries online. I got a massively positive response just because I believe people are clamoring for real, raw, honest, not sugar coated, not what like TV shows show you. They want to know what it's like kind of in the trenches, if you will, when it relates to grief and this kind of stuff. And a lot of people resonated with it. So I created a grief community called Letters to Zachary. And ultimately I wanted something to be a legacy with my son's name in it. And that legacy means that literally a lot of my content is letters actually written to my son, how I've felt in those raw, open moments about, what led up to his passing, afterwards, how I'm dealing with it, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I've been doing that approximately 15 months at this point, not quite a year and a half. At this point, I'm a little over 1,200 followers. And I only say that just because if you'd have told me in the beginning I would have a community of 1,200 people that were following the content I was creating, I would go, "You lost your mind. There's no way. There's no way that many people are going to like what I have to say." Yep. And so, but I did that. And then as we met in some of these podcasting groups, I was in there one day and there was a publisher in there, and I got to talking to her, and I said, I'd really like to do something that's kind of tangible I can hold in my hands. Well, from that came out the Letters to Zachary. It's a coloring book, is what it is. And what it basically is now the first probably 5 or 6 entries are, because I'm the namesake of it and all, it's entries related to my son, my family, that kind of thing. And then every entry after that is at least somebody that I have run across in the grief community that has an entry for their loved one that has passed. Right. So it's either, they're all full coloring book pages, but some of them are coloring book scenes, some of them are collage style scenes. And then on the back of it, it's got their loved one, kind of where they're from, and like a positive attribute about them, something that they love, maybe a quote, a song, some lyrics, something on the back page, so that it creates a living, active, and interactive memorial for those of us that have loved ones in there, and anybody else that's out there that may purchase it, to give them an understanding that there are people out there that understand what you're going through. Yeah. And so that's how kind of the Letters to Zachary coloring book came about.
Yeah. What's the response been to it?
It's been out since August of last year. I think it's been a pretty good response. At this point, I've sold about 150 of them, which, I mean, to your big authors may not, but to me, that's wonderful to me. So I get that it's a very specified kind of niche market. Right. So for me to have sold 150 of them in this specialized market, I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, that's great. What is one tip you can share with the listeners today to be more inclusive? Just one thing, simple thing they can do starting today to be more inclusive?
I tell people just to ask questions, and I'll say that with kind of a caveat to it, meaning when I'm out with my daughter or when my son was running, I don't mind you walking up to me and asking questions about, my son pretty much looked normal, but you could kind of look at him and tell something was going on. So it's not so much that what you're asking, it's more how you're asking it. What's the tone in which you're asking me? Because a lot of people will come up and they don't realize the tone that they're asking me. Now, if it's a young child that goes, "Hey, what's his problem?" I don't fault that child because they don't know any better. But when it's a full-grown adult going, "Well, what's your son's problem?" That's when I have an issue. Because you're a full-grown adult, you can ask that a little better. So ask questions. Again, it's not somewhat what you ask, it's how you ask it.
Yeah, I like that. Where can everybody connect with you?
Well, I have a professional website. It's called letterstozachary.com.
Okay.
And Zachary is spelled Zachary. A lot of people get it confused with ERY. That's my professional website. On the front page, you can scroll down to the bottom, all my social media.
Okay.
But my main page that I started is by the same name is on Facebook, but I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Although TikTok's on pause right now because of everything going on in the government.
Yeah.
But those are my three main ones.
Okay.
I do TikTok just because I like doing the very short video form.
Right.
And typically on there, I ask just short question and answer sessions to kind of get people on TikTok active is what I do on there.
Okay. That's great. Is there anything you want to talk about that we haven't discussed yet?
No, my mission when it comes to whether it's special needs stuff or inclusion or grief, which has kind of been the bigger part of my life recently, is, I tell people all the time, don't necessarily be afraid to ask the question, talk about it, or feel whatever it is, because people outside of you are not living the life you're living. They have no vested interest in it. And to be honest with you, on my little bit more blunter side of life, I go, what does it matter what they think? They don't have to deal with what you're dealing with. Who cares what they think? You're the one in the middle of it, and you're the best one to be the biggest advocate for your child with whatever needs they have. So don't let anybody hinder that.
Yeah, I like that. Ready for the last question?
Sure.
You like Spam lunch meat? Yes or no?
No, I am not. I am not a fan of it. I know there are parts of the country that love it. If it came down to a survival situation, I would grin and bear it. But if it's my choice, I will pass on it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I live in Austin, Minnesota, where the Spam Museum is located. So I've been asking all my guests just to see what the reaction is. It's actually pretty split, yes or no. But yeah, it's interesting.
I've heard it's very popular in Hawaii.
Yep, that is true.
So, I mean, again, it's if I had to choose, no. If it came down to life or death, I would probably say yes.
Yeah. And I saw in January they posted the Spam Museum in this town had like over 100,000 visitors last year. So the town's like 25 to 27,000 people. So it brings a lot of people to town.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being on.
You're welcome. To those listening, thank you for allowing me to be part of your journey. It is truly an honor. Please join the podcast newsletter by clicking on the link in the episode description to keep up with the latest episodes. Together, we can make the world more inclusive. Until next time, stay empowered and be a champion for inclusion.